Thank you, Madam President. And good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. 1 year ago, this Council took the historic decision to unanimously endorse the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. That decision established for the first time an authoritative global standard to address the negative impacts that business activities can have on human rights. These guiding principles were elaborated and developed through extensive stakeholder consultation with stakeholders from a variety of political, economic, and ideological backgrounds. And they were also supported by the range of stakeholders. So not just the member states here in this council, but by the business community and civil society organizations from around the world. The guiding principles are broken down into 3 pillars. So Pillar 1 speaks to states, and it gives a concrete definition of the state duty to protect human rights in the context of business activities. Pillar 2 speaks to companies, and it's about the business responsibility to respect human rights in all their activities. And Pillar 3 is addressed to all actors about the need to ensure effective access to remedies for individuals and communities whose rights have been adversely affected by business operations. So the governance gaps created by globalization that allow for these negative impacts on human rights to happen, these have been identified, and a global standard of conduct has now been established. What is now required is for awareness of the guiding principles to be raised and for states and business enterprises to implement the guiding principles so that they have the positive, sustained impact on human rights that they were designed for. That is the purpose for which this Council has established the UN Working Group on the issue of human rights and transnational corporations and other business enterprises, which I represent today. Since our establishment last November, we have had ongoing engagement with stakeholders, both during our sessions and in between sessions. And we were conscious of engaging with the full range of stakeholders, including member states, businesses, civil society, and others. And all have shown a high degree of interest in the mandate and have provided us with very solid contributions and ideas for our work going forward. We have also received information on the existing initiatives that are already taking place on the guiding principles. And we have also observed and encouraged the fact that important international standards and initiatives are starting to converge around the guiding principles. It is within this context overall that our first report was developed, and it focuses on strategy for carrying out our mandate. The working group felt it was very important to get the strategy right, and from the very beginning, and to be clear about that strategy to all our stakeholders so that we can maximize the opportunities for engagement. And along with conveying our strategy in our report, we also define our activities and outcomes which will underpin that strategy. These are divided into 3 work streams. Now, the first work stream is on dissemination, and it's absolutely important and essential. And that's because there's still limited awareness of the guiding principles out there among the very actors who are required to implement them. So to raise global awareness among what is tens of thousands of actors when you take into account the business community, government circles, and civil society. It's an enormous challenge. So to tackle that challenge, the UN Working Group will focus on what we call multipliers. These are groups that allow us to reach hundreds of actors in one go. So they're like regional organizations, industry associations, and employers' federations, civil society networks, national human rights institutions networks. These groups can help us to raise awareness and knowledge of the guiding principles, but also establish and ground the dialogue and engagement in the national and regional level, which can then feed up and nuance the global dialogue. Now, our second work stream is on promoting implementation of the guiding principles. This is really about taking it from principles on paper into action on the ground. So what does implementation look like? It means applying the principles across scores of countries, thousands of business operations, and across millions of communities. It means working them into highly complex organizational structures, which is essentially what business operations and what states are, highly complex organizations, and applying them in the policies, processes, and performances across these organizations. And ultimately, it means ensuring the guiding principles are hitting the mark and having the outcome that they were designed for. So ensuring that business respects human rights and ensuring effective remedies when adverse impacts do occur. As mentioned in our report, some of these implementation efforts have already begun, and we expect this is the front end of the wave so that more will follow. The working group's role in this area of implementation is really fourfold. Firstly, we will encourage efforts to raise the capacity of the state, business, and civil society to implement the guiding principles by encouraging training and other capacity-building activities. Secondly, we will insist that implementation efforts in one area feed into and inform efforts in another area, so that tools and experiences from one industry sector or one region feed into other sectors and regions, so that we don't fragment efforts. Thirdly, we will encourage implementation efforts to include systematic engagement with all stakeholders, and in particular, to include those that have been negatively affected by business activities, as well as those that are typically marginalized and put in vulnerable positions, such as women, children, and indigenous populations. Fourthly, to ensure that we keep the integrity in the guiding principles, we will issue clarifications and guidance on specific aspects of the guiding principles and develop process and quality criteria that should be taken into consideration by all stakeholders in implementing the principles. Our third work stream focuses on global governance structures. That is, the structures that already provide guidance related to business on human rights issues. Now, these range from standards such as the ILO MNE Declaration, the OECD Guidelines for Multinational Enterprises, the UN Global Compact Principles, as well as multiple other binding and voluntary standards, codes of conduct, common reporting frameworks that have been elaborated by states, international organizations, and multi-stakeholder initiatives. The convergence of these global standards and initiatives with the guiding principles represents a unique opportunity for both a wide reach and a deep influence. And the pre-existing accountability mechanisms integrated into some of these initiatives can put an immediate and compelling force behind the guiding principles. Within these three work streams, if we unpack them further, working group members are also developing projects that they will guide, including proposals to support the development of national action plans, to promote the dissemination and implementation of the principles with regards to indigenous peoples, to embed the principles in specific global governance structures, to identify gaps in access to remedy, and elaborate guidelines to clarify the requirements under the guiding principles, and to foster discussions on models of implementation of the principles by states and business enterprises. The working group is also currently exploring the possibility of country visits with member states so that we're able to ground our work in real-life complexities and realities on the ground, and so that we can speak to and make constructive recommendations to government authorities, business managers, and civil society representatives at the national level, so that the working group can have a real and direct impact and help move the human rights situation forward, both at a local level as well as at a global level. On the 3rd and 4th of December this year, the first forum on business and human rights will take place under the guidance of the UN Working Group. It's a 2-day forum, and it will provide a global platform to pull together a wide variety of stakeholders from business audiences, states, civil society organizations, rights holders, expert groups, and so on, to engage in a dialogue and discuss experiences, opportunities, and challenges in the implementation of the guiding principles. Its success will ultimately depend on what's brought to the table, on the contributions of all stakeholders to share practices and lessons learned, and to engage proactively and in a constructive way. To generate success beyond the forum itself, so that it's not just an event to dialogue and to share learning, but rather has its own impact and leaves its own footprint in the field, we need stakeholders to engage in a dialogue at the national level ahead of the forum and to continue that engagement afterwards into the processes and outcomes that might generate. Madam President, that is what the working group will do. But the responsibility for implementation of the guiding principles rests, first of all, with states and business enterprises. So we look forward to engaging with both and supporting both and other stakeholders in these efforts to achieve our ultimate end goal of reducing negative impacts on human rights of business activities and to ensuring access to effective remedies when they do occur. The final note I would like to end on is about the way we continue in this journey. It's about open and continuous engagement with all stakeholders. We are deeply grateful for the robust and enthusiastic engagement we've had so far with member states of the Council, with businesses, civil society, and other stakeholders. And we promise to continue to place a very high priority on this open engagement. We will rely on your goodwill and commitment to engage so that we can find and forge the best path towards the respect for human rights in business operations. Thank you, Madam President.